and welcome. In a landmark decision, the UK High Court recently reaffirmed the legal and social recognition of gender differences, a ruling with far-reaching implications for law, policy and society. The judgment, delivered in April 2025, comes amid woke provocations about gender identity, biological sex and the non-existent special rights of transgender individuals throughout the universe. It's uncertain how and why these delusional troublemakers believe they're entitled to preferential rights over and above the rest of society, but clearly they do. The case was brought before the High Court following a series of legal challenges concerning the interpretation of gender in public policy, particularly in areas such as single-sex spaces, sports and data collection. At the heart of the matter was whether the law should prioritise self-identified gender or maintain distinctions based on biological sex. The claimants, a heroic collection of women's rights groups and concerned individuals, sensibly argued that erasing legal distinctions between male and female perilously undermined protections for women and girls, especially in contexts like women's prisons, refuges and competitive sports. On the dark side, warped advocacy groups like the Rainbow Mafia for Transgender Rights absurdly contended that legal recognition of self-identified gender is essential for the dignity and equality of trans people. What utter bollocks. The High Court ruled that while gender identity is a protected characteristic under the Equality Law Act of 2010, the law also recognises the material reality of biological sex. Pretty hard not to recognise upon close visual inspection. The judgment clarified that in certain circumstances, such as the provision of single-sex services, participation in sports and the collection of sex disaggregated data, distinctions based on biological sex are lawful and often necessary. The court emphasised that this does not negate the rights of transgender individuals, but rather seeks to balance competing rights in a way that's fair and proportionate. The ruling stated the recognition of gender difference as rooted in biological sex remains a legitimate and necessary consideration in the application of law and policy, particularly where the safety, privacy and fairness of women and girls are at stake. The decision is significant for several reasons. First, it provides legal clarity in an area marked by confusion and controversy. Public bodies, schools, sports organisations and employers now have clearer guidance on how to navigate the interplay between gender identity and biological sex. Second, the ruling reaffirms that the principle that the law can recognise and protect the rights of different groups without erasing the specific needs and vulnerabilities of women and girls. This is particularly important in safeguarding single-sex spaces and ensuring fairness in women's sports. Third, the judgment is likely to influence policy beyond the UK, as other countries contend with similar debates. Legal experts suggest that the decision could serve as a reference point for courts and lawmakers internationally. The immediate outcome of the ruling is that public authorities and organisations must promptly review their policies to ensure compliance with the clarified legal framework. This involves revising guidelines for access to single-sex spaces, updating data collection practices, and reassessing eligibility criteria for gender-segregated sports. Reactions to the decision are mixed. Women's rights groups have welcomed the ruling as a victory for common sense and the protection of hard-won rights. Transgender advocacy mobs and the Rainbow Mafia now call for continued dialogue and legislative reform to ensure that trans people are not marginalised. The UK government has indicated that it will study the judgment carefully and work with stakeholders to implement its findings in a way that respects rights and dignities of all citizens. The High Court's decision marks a pivotal moment in the ongoing conversation about gender rights and equality in the UK. While it settles some legal questions, it also highlights the need for clarity as society navigates through these complex issues. As implications of the ruling unfold, it's clear that the contrived lunacy of gender difference and legal recognition is far from over. However, the High Court has provided a framework for balancing rights and interests in a way that seeks to uphold fairness, safety and dignity for all. While a tremendous victory for common sense, it cannot be allowed to end there. Accordingly, I'm adding my voice to the growing chorus of demands for a reckoning for all the drooling morons who forced society through this disruptive madness. The whole sick debacle was an egregious affront to reason and human dignity and must not be allowed to be quietly shuffled off into history's annals of shame, not without commensurate measures of justice meted out to the treasonous ringleaders and rainbow mafioso thugs. They must be made to answer for such obnoxious terms as birthing person, etc. Cringeworthy absurdities that still make my flesh crawl. And that's not to mention the false criminal prosecutions for so-called hate speech and the rabid censorship born of gender insanity. As I reported from the outset, the shameful debacle was just another weapon used in globalism's controlled demolition of society. And I won't stand by and let them get away with their malicious sabotage of common sense and human values. Neither should anyone else. Among the worst offenders are universities and the entire education system that so bullishly strutted the world stage, parading emperor's clothes. These intellectual Lilliputians made a mockery of every aspect of education in the worst imaginable betrayal of trust. The very reason for their existence was turned on its head, with disastrous consequences yet to fully impact. And that's to say nothing of the unforgivable child abuse inflicted upon emotionally vulnerable juniors so cruelly confused and deliberately deceived. The wider community are deeply concerned about the unconscionable indoctrination of perverse gender ideology and transgenderism being pushed on children. The residual fallout from this abhorrent crime against humanity won't be known for decades. All those abandoning morality to collude in this criminal attempt at reframing the public psyche committed treason. Their blind support of this hateful agenda puts them squarely in the crosshairs of criminal prosecution to the fullest extent possible. The introduction of radical gender ideology into schools is not a neutral act. It is a deliberate imposition of a twisted belief system upon vulnerable children without parental knowledge or consent. This indoctrination is already producing visible confusion and distress among children, now taught to question the fundamental reality of their biological sex at an age when they lack the maturity to process such complex concepts. Children exposed to these ideas experience anxiety, identity confusion, and a sense of alienation from their own bodies and families. Yet what's most alarming are the unknown and potentially catastrophic long-term consequences of these interventions. The psychological, social, and physical impacts of teaching children that their gender is fluid or that they're born in the wrong body are only beginning to surface, and the devastating scale of harm won't be measurable for decades. Then there's the shameful issue of irreversible medicalisation. Social affirmation is often the first step on a pathway towards medical interventions such as puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, which cause permanent changes including infertility and loss of sexual function. The long-term health consequences of these treatments remains largely unstudied in children, raising grave ethical concerns about grossly inappropriate experimentation on minors. Children affirmed in transgender identity feel trapped, fearing social or familial rejection if they later regress or doubt these decisions. This leads to long-term mental health issues, including depression, anxiety, and a sense of isolation. The normalisation of gender ideology in schools undermines parental authority, eroding trust between families and educational institutions, and fostering division within communities. The alienation of children from their parents, who are often excluded from critical decisions about their child's identity and medical care, experience profound and lasting effects on family cohesion and child development. The dismantling of single-sex spaces in the name of inclusivity menaces the safety and privacy of girls and reverses decades of progress in women's rights and child protection. The long-term societal consequences of this shift are unknown, but facilitate increased vulnerability to harassment and abuse. What's also callously ignored is the issue of regret and detransition. Studies indicate that the majority of children experiencing gender dysphoria outgrow it by adulthood without any medical intervention. Encouraging irreversible changes in children who would otherwise desist will produce a generation of regret, medical complications, and psychological trauma. The unalterable harm caused by perverse gender ideology and its associated practices is real, direct, and measurable. Indoctrinating defenseless children, affirming incongruent identities, using misleading language, and promoting medical interventions inflicts significant physical, psychological, and social damage. Yet, the full extent of these harms and the broader societal fallout remains shrouded in uncertainty, with consequences that will only become apparent many years from now. The reckless promotion of gender ideology among children is an unprecedented social experiment whose unknown consequences will reverberate for generations. By prioritising ideology over evidence and radical activism over safeguarding, those responsible knowingly inflict enduring harm on the most vulnerable members of society. The need for extreme caution, full transparency, and robust safeguarding has never been more urgent. The true cost of these sadistic machinations won't be fully realised until it's far too late. Thank you.